The courthouse steps were slick with morning dew, but Elara's bare feet barely registered the cold. Her hands, bound tightly with coarse rope that had already rubbed her wrists raw, trembled not from the chill, but from the weight of what had just transpired inside those ancient stone walls. Guilty. The word still echoed in her mind, hollow and final, like the tolling of a funeral bell. Guilty of a crime she had not committed. Guilty of treachery she had never conceived. Guilty because it was convenient. Because someone needed a scapegoat. Because a girl with no family and no fortune made the perfect sacrifice. The crowd that had gathered to witness her sentencing parted as the royal guards emerged, their crimson cloaks billowing in the wind like pools of spilled wine. Their faces were impassive, carved from the same unforgiving stone as the courthouse itself. To them, she was already dead. A task to be completed, nothing more. "Move!" one of them growled, shoving her forward with the blunt end of his spear. Elara stumbled but caught herself, her threadbare dress, once a soft blue, now faded to the color of old bruises, catching on the rough stones. She had worn this dress the day they arrested her 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of a cold cell, moldy bread, and the growing certainty that no one would believe her innocence. The village of Thornhaven stretched before her, its familiar streets now lined with faces she had known all her life, faces that would not meet her eyes. Mrs. Kellen, who had bought herbs from her just last month, clutched her shawl tighter and turned away. Young Thomas, the blacksmith's apprentice who had once smiled shyly when she passed, stared at the ground as if it held all the answers to the universe. Only old Benedict, the half-blind beggar who sat at the corner of Market Street, dared to speak. "She didn't do it," he croaked, his milky eyes somehow finding hers across the distance. "The girl's innocent, I tell you. Innocent." A guard struck him across the shoulder with the shaft of his weapon. "Silence, old fool. The court has spoken." The court. What a mockery that had been. Lord Castellan, with his cold gray eyes and thin smile, presenting evidence that materialized from nowhere. A witness who claimed to have seen her in places she had never been, documents bearing a signature that looked nothing like her own hand. And through it all, she had stood in that dock, her voice cracking as she tried to explain, to reason, to plead. But they had already decided. She could see it in their eyes, in the way they looked through her rather than at her. The trial was merely theater, a performance to satisfy the pretense of justice. "Why?" she had whispered to Lord Castellan as they led her from the courtroom. "Why are you doing this?" He had leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "Because, my dear, some secrets are worth any price, even an innocent life." Those words haunted her now as the guards marched her through the village gates and onto the forest road. What secrets? What had she stumbled upon without even knowing it? She was nobody, an orphan who gathered herbs, who sang to herself while walking the meadows, who lived in a cottage barely large enough to contain a bed and a cooking pot. The forest road stretched ahead, ancient oaks forming a cathedral of shadow and filtered light. The forbidden forest. She had walked its edges many times, gathering mushrooms and wild sage, but never had she ventured deep. No one did. The forest belonged to the wolves, and the wolves belonged to him, the Alpha King. Even his title sent shivers down the spines of grown men. He was legend and nightmare intertwined, the supreme ruler of the wild realms, commander of the great wolf packs that roamed the untamed lands beyond human borders. Some said he was more beast than man. Others whispered that he was neither, but something older, something that predated the kingdoms themselves. And he was judge, jury, and executioner for those the human courts deemed too dangerous or too tainted for a simple hanging. "The Alpha King don't take long about it," one of the guards muttered to his companion as they walked. "Clean. Quick. Better than what she deserves, if you ask me. Heard he tears out their throats himself," the other replied, his voice carrying a perverse fascination. "Seen it once, I did. Criminal didn't even have time to scream." Elara's legs nearly gave out. She forced herself to keep walking, to maintain some shred of dignity even as terror clawed at her chest. She had heard the stories too. Everyone had. Children were warned that if they misbehaved, the Alpha King would come for them in the night. Criminals would sometimes choose death by hanging rather than face delivery to the forest. The trees grew denser. their branches interweaving overhead until the sky was merely suggestions of light between leaves. The temperature dropped. The guards' hands moved to their weapons, their earlier bravado fading with each step deeper into the woods. Then came the howl. It rose from somewhere ahead, a sound both beautiful and terrifying, primal in a way that bypassed reason and spoke directly to the most ancient parts of the human brain. It said, "Predator." It said, "Run." It said, "You do not belong here." The guards froze. Even the birds had gone silent. "Light preserve us," one whispered, making the sign of protection across his chest. Another howl joined the first, then another, until the forest itself seemed to sing with lupine voices. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. Through the trees ahead, she saw movement, massive shapes flowing between the trunks like living shadows. Wolves. But not like any wolves she had seen in drawings or heard described in tales. These were enormous, each easily the size of a pony, their fur ranging from midnight black to silver gray to rich auburn. Their eyes glowed with an intelligence that was distinctly, disturbingly aware. And they were watching her. "This is where we leave you," the lead guard said, cutting the ropes that bound her to their group but leaving her wrists tied. He practically threw the sealed execution decree at her feet. "You walk forward from here, alone. Please," Elara heard herself say, hating the weakness in her voice. "Please, there's been a mistake." "I didn't—" "The Alpha King don't care about your protests," the guard interrupted. "You've been judged. Now face your sentence." They retreated quickly, almost running, their relief at leaving palpable. Within moments, she was alone on the forest path, surrounded by ancient trees and circling wolves. The decree lay at her feet, its wax seal bearing the mark of the High Court. She didn't need to read it. She knew what it said. Elara Thorne, convicted of high treachery and forbidden practice. Sentenced to execution by the authority of the Alpha King. "Well," she whispered to herself, surprised by how steady her voice sounded now that the guards were gone. "If I'm to face my end, I'll do it on my feet." She took a step forward, then another. The wolves moved with her, keeping pace, their massive forms gliding through the undergrowth with supernatural grace. She counted 7 of them, though more shadows suggested others lurking beyond her sight. The path opened into a clearing, and there he stood, the Alpha King. Elara's breath caught in her throat. He was tall, impossibly tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of raw power barely contained. His hair was dark, almost black, falling to his shoulders in waves that caught the scattered light. He wore leather and furs, practical clothing that somehow seemed regal on his frame, but it was his eyes that stopped her heart. Gold. Pure, molten gold, lit from within by something that was definitely not human. They fixed on her with the unwavering focus of a predator evaluating prey. He held a blade in his right hand, long and wickedly curved, its edge catching the light. An execution blade. Elara Thorne. His voice was deep, resonant, carrying the hint of a growl beneath the words. Not a question, a statement. Yes. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. He moved forward with fluid grace, each step measured and purposeful. The wolves parted for him, their massive heads lowering in deference. He stopped 3 paces away, close enough that she could see the sharp angles of his face, the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the way his nostrils flared slightly as he scented the air. "You know why you're here." Yes. There was no point in denial, in pleading. She could see it in his eyes. He had done this before, many times. He was the instrument of final justice, the ending of stories that society deemed unworthy of continuation. He reached down and picked up the decree, breaking the seal with one thumb. His eyes scanned the document, his expression never changing. When he finished, he let it fall back to the ground. "The court has condemned you for acts of treachery against the crown and practice of forbidden arts." His golden eyes met hers. "Do you have any final words?" Final words. As if she were already gone. Already nothing but a memory to be forgotten. Something inside Elara shifted. Not acceptance, but a strange sort of clarity. She had spent 3 weeks in a cell, terrified and confused, desperately trying to understand how her simple life had led to this moment. She had begged and pleaded and cried until she had no tears left. But now, facing her executioner in this ancient forest, she felt something else entirely. Not peace, exactly. More like the decision to meet death as herself, not as the broken thing they had tried to make her. "I didn't do what they accused me of," she said quietly. "I don't even understand half of what they claimed. I gathered herbs. I sang to pass the time. I harmed no one." She met his golden gaze directly. "But I don't expect you to care. You're here to follow orders, and I'm here to receive them. So do what you must." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He raised the blade. Elara's instinct was to close her eyes, to turn away, but she fought it. If she was to end here, she would face it. She would see it coming. But as the blade began its descent, something unexpected happened. A sound escaped her lips. Not a scream, not a plea, but something else entirely. A note, pure and clear, rising from somewhere deep in her chest. She hadn't planned it, hadn't even realized she was doing it until the sound was already in the air. It was the lullaby her mother, or the woman she dimly remembered as her mother, used to sing. The only memory she had from before the orphanage, before the long years of solitude. A melody without words, haunting and ancient, that had always brought her comfort in dark moments. The blade stopped. The Alpha King stood frozen, his arm still raised, his expression shifting from cold determination to something she couldn't read. But it wasn't him that made her breath catch. It was the wolves. Every single one had stopped moving. Their massive heads were raised, ears perked forward, golden and amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that bordered on reverence. And then, impossibly, they began to respond. The first howl came from the largest wolf, a silver-gray female with a white blaze across her muzzle. It started low, then rose to match the pitch of Elara's song, intertwining with her melody in a way that seemed impossible, seemed intentional. Another wolf joined, then another, until the clearing was filled with lupine voices rising in harmony with her own. They weren't attacking, weren't threatening, they were singing with her. Elara's note faltered in shock, but her voice picked up again, stronger now, the melody flowing more freely. She couldn't explain what was happening, couldn't rationalize it, but as she sang, she felt something awaken inside her, a warmth spreading from her chest outward, a connection to something vast and ancient and utterly beyond her understanding. The wolves moved closer, but not to attack. They formed a circle around her, their huge bodies creating a living barrier between her and the Alpha King. The silver-gray female came closest, her massive head nearly level with Elara's shoulder, and pressed her muzzle gently against Elara's bound hands. The Alpha King lowered his blade slowly, his expression one of absolute astonishment. In all his years, and Elara could see they were many, despite his youthful appearance, he had clearly never witnessed anything like this. "Stand down," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Return to formation." The wolves didn't move. If anything, they pressed closer to Elara, their bodies tense, protective. The silver female turned her massive head toward her king and released a low growl. Not of aggression toward Elara, but of warning toward him, his wolves, his pack. The creatures that had followed him for decades, that had never once questioned his commands, that were bound to him by ancient magic and blood oath, they were defying him, for her. Elara's song faded, her voice dying in her throat as the magnitude of what was happening crashed over her. The wolves remained, their circle unbroken, their eyes moving between her and their king. The Alpha King's jaw was tight, his knuckles white around the hilt of his blade. He took a step forward. The wolves shifted, shoulders bunching, ready to fight if necessary, against their own king, for a human girl they had never met. "What sorcery is this?" His voice was low, dangerous, each word carefully controlled. But beneath the anger, Elara heard something else. Confusion, maybe even fear. "I don't know," she whispered truthfully. "I was just singing. I didn't mean to. I didn't know." "What are you?" he demanded. And this time the growl beneath his words was unmistakable. "No human has commanded the wolves since—" He stopped abruptly, his eyes widening slightly as if a realization had struck him. He looked at her differently now, his gaze sweeping over her face, her form, searching for something. "It's impossible," he muttered, more to himself than to her. The bloodline ended. They were all destroyed in the purge. "What bloodline?" Elara asked, but he wasn't listening. He sheathed his blade with a decisive motion and stood straighter, seeming to come to some internal decision. "I cannot execute you with my own pack in rebellion, and I cannot return you to the humans without understanding what you are." His golden eyes fixed on her with penetrating intensity. "You're coming with me." "Coming with you? Where?" "To my fortress. You will remain there until I determine what manner of creature you truly are, and why my wolves, who have never disobeyed me in over 2 centuries, have chosen to protect you over following their king." 2 centuries. The words hung in the air, confirming what the stories suggested. He was far older than he appeared, far more than human. "And if I refuse?" The words escaped before Elara could stop them. A hint of dark amusement flickered across his face. "Then you remain in the forest, unprotected, while I inform the human authorities that their condemned prisoner has escaped. How long do you think you'd survive, girl? My wolves may have chosen to protect you, but there are far worse things in these woods than me." He had a point. And truthfully, what choice did she have? Return to the humans meant certain death. Refuse him and face the forest alone meant probable death. At least going with him meant more time, more chances to understand what had just happened. "I'll come," she said quietly. He nodded once, then gestured to the silver-gray wolf. "Moira will stay close to you. Don't stray from the path, and don't sing again." He paused, his expression darkening. "Not until I understand what your voice can do." The Alpha King turned and began walking deeper into the forest, his stride confident despite the impossible situation. The other wolves fell into formation around him, though Elara noticed they kept glancing back at her, as if torn between their king and this inexplicable pull toward her. Only Moira remained at her side, the massive she-wolf's warm bulk pressing gently against Elara's leg as they walked. As they moved deeper into the wild realms, away from everything Elara had ever known, she found her mind racing with questions. What had just happened? What was this power her voice seemed to hold? And why did the Alpha King's words about bloodlines and purges send chills down her spine? Behind them, the execution decree lay forgotten on the forest floor, its words already fading as morning dew settled upon the parchment. Elara Thorne had been sent to the forbidden forest to die. Instead, something impossible had awakened. And in the dangerous days ahead, both she and the Alpha King would discover that her voice held secrets that could reshape kingdoms, or destroy them entirely. The wolves knew. They had always known. Now, finally, so would she. The fortress emerged from the forest like a sleeping giant, its stone walls covered in climbing vines and moss that spoke of centuries standing sentinel between the wild realms and the world beyond. It wasn't the cold, imposing structure Elara had imagined. Instead, it seemed to grow organically from the landscape itself, as if the ancient stones had simply decided to arrange themselves into towers and walls, working in harmony with the massive trees that surrounded it. Torches flickered in iron sconces along the outer walls, their flames dancing in the evening breeze. The journey had taken most of the day, traveling deeper into the forest than Elara had thought possible. The trees here were different, older, their trunks so wide that 10 men holding hands couldn't encircle them. The air itself felt different, thrumming with an energy that made her skin tingle. The Alpha King hadn't spoken a word during the entire trek. He walked with the assured stride of someone who knew every root, every stone, every shadow of this path. His wolves ranged around them in a protective formation, though Moira never left Elara's side, the massive she-wolf's presence somehow comforting despite her fearsome size. As they approached the main gate, it swung open without anyone touching it. Inside, the courtyard was illuminated by more torches, and what appeared to be luminescent moss growing in patterns along the walls, casting an ethereal blue-green glow. Figures moved in the shadows, more wolves, some in their animal forms, others changing. Elara watched in stunned fascination as one of the wolves shimmered, its form blurring and reforming until a tall woman stood where the beast had been moments before. She wore simple leather clothing and regarded Elara with curious amber eyes. "My lord," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight growl even in human form. "We weren't expecting—" Her eyes widened as she took in Elara, then moved to Moira standing protectively beside her. "Is that—" "Summon Grandmother Kale," the Alpha King interrupted, his tone brooking no questions. "Immediately. And prepare the East Tower room." The woman's eyebrows rose, but she nodded and disappeared into the fortress. Other wolves, both in animal and human forms, had gathered in the courtyard, their eyes fixed on Elara with a mixture of curiosity and something that looked disturbingly like recognition. "This way," the Alpha King said, gesturing toward the main entrance. Elara's bound wrists had begun to ache hours ago, the rope cutting into her skin with each step. She stumbled slightly on the threshold, and Moira pressed closer, offering support. The Alpha King noticed, his golden eyes dropping to her hands. With an irritated sound, he pulled a knife from his belt. Elara flinched back instinctively, and something flashed across his face. Not quite offense, but close. "I'm cutting the ropes," he said flatly. "If I wanted you harmed, girl, you'd already be dead." He sliced through the bindings with one swift motion. The rope fell away, and Elara gasped as blood rushed back into her hands. The skin beneath was raw and bleeding where the coarse fibers had abraded it. The Alpha King stared at her wrists for a long moment, his jaw tightening. "Humans," he muttered with undisguised contempt. "So eager to torture their own kind, then send them to me for execution, as if that absolves them of guilt." He turned and continued into the fortress, leaving Elara to hurry after him through corridors lit by more of that strange luminescent moss. The walls were carved with intricate patterns, wolves running beneath moons, forests rendered in stunning detail, symbols she didn't recognize but that made something in her chest resonate when she looked at them. They climbed a spiral staircase, Moira somehow managing the steps despite her size, until they reached a wooden door banded with iron. The Alpha King pushed it open to reveal a circular room that took Elara's breath away. It was beautiful. A large bed occupied one side, covered in furs and soft fabrics. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes. A fireplace held logs ready to be lit, and tall windows looked out over the forest canopy. The last rays of sunset painted everything in shades of amber and gold. "You'll stay here," the Alpha King said. "Don't attempt to leave. The fortress is warded. You wouldn't make it past the gates, and I'd prefer not to have to chase you through the forest." "Why are you doing this?" Elara asked, finding her voice. "You were sent to execute me. Why bring me here instead?" He turned to face her fully, and the intensity of his gaze made her want to step back. "Because my wolves have never disobeyed me. Not once in 237 years. The bond between an alpha and his pack is absolute. It cannot be broken by whim or fancy. Yet today, they chose to protect you over following my command." He moved closer, and Elara forced herself to hold her ground. "That means you are either something very dangerous or something very important. Possibly both, and I will not rest until I understand which." "I'm neither," Elara protested. "I'm nobody. Just an orphan who gathered herbs and sang a song that made my wolves howl in harmony," he interrupted. "A song that awakened something in them I've never witnessed. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending to be ordinary, girl. You may not understand what you are, but you are anything but common." He strode to the door, then paused. "Grandmother Kale will examine you shortly. She is the eldest among us, keeper of histories and old magic. If anyone can determine what you are, it's her. Answer her questions truthfully." His golden eyes locked onto hers. "And do not sing. Not a note, not a hum. Not until we understand what your voice can do. Are we clear?" Elara nodded, not trusting her voice. He left, the door closing behind him with a solid thud. She heard no lock turn. He didn't need one. Where could she go? She was miles into the forbidden forest, surrounded by wolf shifters who could track her scent across continents, held in a warded fortress by a creature older than the kingdoms themselves. Moira, who had followed them into the room, padded over to the fireplace and lay down with a soft huff, her massive head resting on her paws. But her eyes remained open, watching Elara with that unsettling intelligence. Elara sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs finally giving out. The events of the day crashed over her like a wave: the execution decree, the journey through the forest, the impossible moment when the wolves had answered her song, the Alpha King's shock and subsequent decision to bring her here. She looked down at her raw wrists, at the dried blood and torn skin. Carefully, she made her way to a basin in the corner where fresh water had been provided. As she cleaned her wounds, hissing at the sting, she tried to make sense of everything. The song. It had been her mother's lullaby, the only thing she remembered from before the orphanage. She had hummed it countless times over the years for comfort, but nothing like this had ever happened. What was different about today? The forest? The wolves? Her own desperate circumstances? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, wondering if wolves bothered with such niceties. The door opened to reveal an elderly woman, or at least, someone who appeared elderly. She was small and slightly hunched, with long silver hair woven into intricate braids, but her eyes were the same golden amber as the Alpha King's, sharp and ancient, and missing nothing. She carried a leather satchel and moved with the careful precision of someone whose body might be aged, but whose mind remained razor-sharp. Moira's tail thumped once against the floor in greeting. "So," the old woman said, her voice surprisingly strong, "you're the one who's thrown my grandson into such confusion. Good. He's been too certain of himself for far too long." She closed the door and gestured to a chair by the fire. "Sit, child. Let me look at you." "Your grandson?" Elara asked, moving to the chair. "The Alpha King is your grandson?" "Yes, though he stopped using his given name long ago, preferring his title, King's." She snorted softly. Always so serious. She settled into the opposite chair with a slight groan. "I'm called Grandmother Kale, keeper of our histories and the old ways. And you are Elara Thorne, convicted of crimes you didn't commit and sent to die in the forest." It wasn't a question, but Elara nodded anyway. Grandmother Kale leaned forward, her golden eyes studying Elara's face with uncomfortable intensity. "Tell me about your parents, child. Your true parents. Not the orphanage that raised you." "I don't remember them," Elara admitted. "I have one memory, a woman singing to me. The lullaby the one I sang in the forest, but nothing else. The orphanage said I was found as an infant, left at their door with nothing but a blanket and a wooden pendant." She reached into her dress and pulled out the pendant she always wore, a simple carved wooden disc on a leather cord. "This." Grandmother Kale's breath caught. She reached out with trembling fingers. "May I?" Elara lifted the cord over her head and handed it over. The old woman held it close to her eyes, turning it in the firelight. The carving was simple, concentric circles with what might have been a tree or a burst of light in the center. Elara had studied it thousands of times over the years, finding comfort in its smooth surface. "Light preserve us," Grandmother Kale whispered. "It's true. After all these years, it's true." "What's true? What is that?" The old woman looked up, her eyes glistening. "This is the mark of the cantor line, the song weavers, the voice blessed." She held up a hand as Elara started to speak. "Let me explain from the beginning. There's much you need to understand, and quickly." She settled back in her chair, still clutching the pendant. "Long ago, before the kingdoms took their current forms, before the wild realms were pushed back to the forests, there existed a bloodline of humans with an extraordinary gift. They were called cantors, individuals whose voices could influence the natural world itself, not through spells or incantations, but through song, pure, instinctive song. Elara's heart began to race. The cantors could sing to make crops grow, to calm storms, to heal wounds, to communicate with animals in ways no one else could. They were revered, protected, sought after by every kingdom, but more than anything, they had a special bond with wolves. The first cantor made a pact in the sacred grove with the first wolf pack, a bond of mutual respect and cooperation. Cantors could sing to wolves, and wolves would answer, not as masters and servants, but as equals, as partners. "But what happened to them?" Elara asked. "Why have I never heard of this?" Grandmother Kyle's expression darkened. "Because a cantor queen emerged who was too powerful, too influential. She could sing, and entire armies would lay down their weapons. She could sing, and forests would shift to create barriers. The kingdoms feared her, feared what she represented, a power that couldn't be controlled by crown or sword. So they united just once, in a terrible purpose. They called it the Purge of Songs. The words hung in the air like a curse. They hunted down every known cantor, men, women, children. It didn't matter. They were executed, burned, erased from history. The kingdoms then forbade any mention of them, suppressed all records, turned them into nothing more than myths and legends. Within 2 generations, most people had forgotten they ever existed. Grandmother Kale's hands tightened on the pendant. We thought they had succeeded. We thought every last cantor was gone. But Elara couldn't finish the sentence. You're a cantor, child. The last of your bloodline, hidden away all these years, probably by a parent desperate to save you from the same fate that befell your ancestors. She handed the pendant back to Elara. That's why the wolves answered your song. That's why they defied their alpha to protect you. They recognized what you are, what you're meant to be. Elara's mind reeled. But I can't do any of those things you described. I can't make crops grow or calm storms because you were never trained. Your gift has lain dormant, untapped, emerging only in moments of extreme emotion or danger. What you experienced in the forest was just the beginning, just the tip of your true potential. Grandmother Kyle leaned forward again. Tell me, child, why were you condemned? What were you accused of? Treachery against the crown and forbidden practices, Elara recited. But I didn't do anything. I just lived quietly, gathered herbs, kept to myself. Think carefully. In the weeks before your arrest, did anything unusual happen? Did you sing anywhere public? Did anyone see or hear something they shouldn't have? Elara started to shake her head, then stopped. There was one thing. About a month before they arrested me, I was gathering herbs in the meadow outside Thornhaven. Lord Castellan, he's the one who brought the charges against me. He rode past with some of his men. They were chasing a deer, hunting it. The poor creature was terrified, running straight toward me. Go on, Grandmother Kale urged. I don't know what came over me. I started singing without thinking, just trying to calm the deer, to help it. And it stopped. It walked right up to me and pressed its head against my hand, like it was asking for protection. Lord Castellan and his men saw everything. They stared at me like I was some kind of monster. Lord Castellan's face went white. He rode away without a word, and 2 weeks later I was arrested. He recognized what you were, Grandmother Kale said grimly, or at least suspected. The old families, the ones whose bloodlines go back to the time before the purge, they remember. They keep the old knowledge alive, passed down in secret. He saw you influence an animal with your voice, and he knew. He couldn't risk you discovering your full power, couldn't risk the return of the cantors. So he manufactured evidence, held a false trial, and condemned you to execution. But why not just hang me in the village? Why send me to the Alpha King? Because hanging might create a martyr. People might ask questions, might investigate. But death in the Forbidden Forest? That's final. No body to examine, no evidence to dispute. You simply disappear. Another criminal who met their deserved end. Grandmother Kale's expression softened. He didn't count on your voice awakening in the forest itself, in the presence of wolves who would recognize you for what you are. Elara stood abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. She paced to the window, looking out over the darkening forest. This is insane. I'm nobody. I can't be this cantor thing you're describing. I don't want to be. Want has nothing to do with it, child. You are what you were born to be. Grandmother Kale rose more slowly, joining her at the window. And now that your gift has awakened, now that it's been witnessed, you're in grave danger. Lord Castellan won't believe you died in the forest, not after he sent you specifically to the Alpha King for execution, and you haven't been confirmed gone. He'll come looking, and he won't be alone. There are factions in every kingdom who remember the cantors and fear their return. What am I supposed to do? You must go to the sacred grove, where the first pact was made. There, you can fully awaken your gift, learn to control it, and discover the truth of your heritage. The grove holds memories, child, echoes of every cantor who came before. It will teach you what you need to know. And where is this grove? 3 days' journey north, deep in the wild realms where even my people rarely venture. The path is dangerous, filled with creatures that would see you as prey or threat. You'll need protection. You'll need... A loud crash from below shook the tower. Shouts erupted, followed by sounds Elara couldn't identify, like wind howling through a tunnel, mixed with inhuman screeches. Moira leaped to her feet, hackles raised, a deep growl rumbling in her chest. Grandmother Kale's face went pale. Shadow creatures. They're here. Shadow creatures? What are... No time. The old woman grabbed Elara's arm with surprising strength. They're hunting you. Someone sent them. She pulled Elara toward the door. We need to get you to my grandson. Now! They burst into the corridor to find chaos. Wolves in both human and animal forms raced past, heading for the stairs. Through a window, Elara caught a glimpse of something that made her blood freeze. Shapes made of darkness itself, writhing and coiling, with eyes that glowed sickly green. They poured over the fortress walls like a plague, dozens of them, maybe more. A wolf man, she couldn't think of another term, skidded to a halt beside them. His face was twisted in partial transformation, neither fully human nor fully wolf, and his voice came out distorted. Grandmother Kyle, you need to get to safety. These things are... His eyes landed on Elara. They're coming for her. They ignore everyone else and head straight for her scent. Where's the alpha? Grandmother Kyle demanded. Courtyard, fighting the main force. Get us there. Protect her with your life. The wolf man nodded and shifted fully into his animal form. A massive, russet-colored wolf. He positioned himself in front of them and led the way down the stairs, moving with lethal grace. They emerged into the courtyard to find a battle like something from a nightmare. The shadow creatures were everywhere, their forms constantly shifting and reforming. When wolves bit at them, their teeth passed through shadow before finding something solid. When claws struck true, the creatures would dissolve partially before coalescing again, and in the center of it all stood the Alpha King. He had partially shifted, his form caught between human and wolf, taking the most dangerous aspects of both. His hands had become clawed, his face elongated, his body rippling with muscle and power. He fought with primal fury, tearing through shadow creatures with devastating efficiency. But for every one he destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. A shadow creature broke away from the main fight and raced toward Elara with terrifying speed. The russet wolf leaped to intercept, but the creature was faster. It reached out with limbs made of smoke and darkness, its green eyes fixed on Elara with malevolent hunger. Elara screamed. The sound that emerged wasn't just fear, it was something more. It was her voice, raw and instinctive, rising in a note of pure defensive will. The shadow creature froze mid-lunge, its form rippling as if struck by a physical force. Other creatures turned toward her, drawn by the sound. No! Grandmother Kale shouted. Don't sing! You'll draw them all! But it was too late. The note had already escaped, and now it hung in the air like a beacon. Every shadow creature in the courtyard suddenly changed direction, abandoning their individual fights to converge on Elara's position. The Alpha King's roar of fury echoed off the stone walls. He tore through the creatures between him and Elara with savage desperation, his golden eyes blazing. Protect her! Form ranks! The wolves responded instantly, creating a living barrier around Elara and Grandmother Kale. But there were too many shadow creatures, and they kept coming, pouring over the walls in waves. You have to sing! Grandmother Kale shouted over the chaos. Really sing! Not in fear, but in command! Remember, you're a cantor. Make them obey. I don't know how. Then learn! Now! A shadow creature broke through the defensive line, its claws extended toward Elara's throat. Time seemed to slow. She could see every detail of its form, the way darkness twisted and coiled around a core of something ancient and hungry. She could feel her heartbeat pounding in her ears, feel the breath catching in her lungs. And she could feel something else, that warmth from the forest, that connection to something vast and powerful. It was inside her, had always been inside her, waiting to be acknowledged. Elara opened her mouth and sang. Not the lullaby this time, but something new, something that came from a place deeper than memory. The melody poured out of her like water from a broken dam, rising and falling in patterns she didn't consciously know but somehow understood. It was a song of command, of natural order, of the ancient balance between light and dark. The shadow creature froze. Then, impossibly, it began to dissolve, not into nothingness, but into something else. Light. Pure, clean light that spiraled upward and dissipated into the night air. The other creatures stopped their advance, their forms flickering uncertainly. Elara's song grew stronger, more confident. She didn't understand the words. Weren't words, really, just sounds that carried meaning beyond language. But she knew their purpose. She was singing the darkness back to wherever it came from, unmaking the magic that had given it form. One by one, the shadow creatures dissolved into light, their green eyes fading as they returned to whatever realm had spawned them. The wolves watched in stunned silence as Elara's voice cleansed the courtyard of every last trace of the attack. When the final creature vanished, Elara's song faltered and died. Her legs gave out, and she would have collapsed if Moira hadn't been there to catch her, the massive she-wolf somehow supporting her weight. The Alpha King stood across the courtyard, his chest heaving, his partially shifted form slowly returning to human. His clothes were torn, dark blood, his own or the creature's, Elara couldn't tell, staining his skin, but it was his expression that captured her attention. Awe, fear, recognition, and something else she couldn't quite name. He walked toward her slowly, and the wolves parted to let him through. When he reached her, he dropped to one knee, bringing his eyes level with hers. Up close, she could see that he was trembling. Whether from exertion or emotion, she didn't know. "What are you?" he asked again. But this time the question held no threat, only wonder. Grandmother Kale answered for her, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "She is what we thought extinct. She is what the kingdoms feared above all else. She is a cantor, blessed with the voice that commands nature itself, and she is the last of her bloodline." The Alpha King's eyes never left Elara's face. "The shadow creatures. Someone sent them to eliminate you before you could awaken. Someone who knows what you are and fears what you could become." "Lord Castellan," Elara whispered. "He's the one who had me condemned. He saw me calm a deer with my voice. And he knew. Then he'll send more," the Alpha King said grimly. He stood, offering Elara his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, letting him pull her to her feet. "You're not safe here. You're not safe anywhere within reach of the human kingdoms." "The sacred grove," Grandmother Kale interjected. "She must reach the sacred grove. Only there can she fully awaken her gift and learn to defend herself." The Alpha King nodded slowly, his tactical mind clearly working through possibilities. 3 days north, through the deep wild, past the Black Rapids, into territory even we rarely venture. His golden eyes locked onto Elara's. "It's a dangerous journey. There are things in those woods that make shadow creatures look tame. I'll go alone if I have to," Elara said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "I won't put anyone else at risk." A sound escaped him. Not quite a laugh, not quite a scoff. "You wouldn't last a day. Besides," he gestured to Moira, still standing protectively at Elara's side, "my wolves have made their choice clear. They've claimed you as one of their own. I couldn't keep them from following you if I tried." He was quiet for a long moment, and Elara could see the conflict warring across his features. Finally, he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of a decision that would change everything. "I was sent to execute a criminal. Instead, I find myself sworn to protect a queen." He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect that seemed to cost him something. "I will take you to the sacred grove myself. You'll have my protection, my pack, and whatever strength I can offer. We leave at first light." "Why?" Elara asked. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. You owe me nothing." His expression softened slightly. "Because the wolves have spoken, and in 2 centuries, they've never been wrong. Because you stood in my courtyard and sang away a darkness that would have destroyed my people. And because," he paused, seeming to struggle with the words, "because the law I was sent to uphold was built on lies and fear. I've executed many who deserved their fate. But I will not be the instrument of genocide against a bloodline that was slaughtered for the crime of being powerful." He turned to address the gathered wolves, both those in human and animal form. Tonight we rest and tend our wounds. Tomorrow we journey to the sacred grove. It will be dangerous. Any who wish to remain behind may do so without dishonor. Not a single wolf moved. Moira's tail wagged once, and several others growled their agreement. The Alpha King's lips curved in a slight smile, the first Elara had seen from him. So be it. Prepare provisions for a week's journey. We travel fast and light. As the wolves began to disperse, following his orders, he turned back to Elara. You should rest. Tomorrow will test you in ways you can't imagine. I'm not sure I can sleep after all this, Elara admitted. Try. You'll need your strength. He started to walk away, then paused. And Elara? What you did tonight, that was just the beginning. The songs you sang were instinctive, uncontrolled. When you reach the grove and truly awaken your gift, he shook his head. The kingdoms were right to fear the cantors. Your voice has the power to reshape the world itself. He left her standing in the courtyard, surrounded by wolves who watched her with a mixture of reverence and protectiveness. Grandmother Kale took her arm gently. Come, child. Let's tend to those wrists and get you properly settled. You have questions, I'm sure, and I'll answer what I can. As they walked back toward the tower, Elara looked up at the night sky. Stars glittered between the clouds, ancient and unchanging. Somewhere out there, Lord Castellan was likely receiving news that his shadow creatures had failed. He would send something else, something worse. And somewhere even further, the sacred grove waited, holding secrets and powers she couldn't yet imagine. She was Elara Thorne, orphan and herb gatherer, falsely condemned and marked for death. But she was also something more now, something ancient and powerful and terrifying. She was the last cantor, and her song had only just begun. Dawn broke over the forbidden forest in shades of crimson and gold, painting the canopy in colors that reminded Elara uncomfortably of blood and fire. She stood at her window in the East Tower, having barely slept despite Grandmother Kale's herbal tea and soothing words. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those shadow creatures dissolving into light, felt the strange power flowing through her voice like a river finding its course. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Enter, she called, turning from the window. The Alpha King stepped inside, and Elara was struck by how different he looked in the morning light. He had cleaned the blood from the previous night's battle and changed into traveling clothes. Dark leather reinforced with what looked like scales at the shoulders and forearms, practical boots, and a heavy cloak. His dark hair was tied back, revealing the sharp angles of his face more clearly. But it was his eyes that held her attention, still that molten gold, but softer somehow in the dawn light. We leave within the hour, he said without preamble. Grandmother Kyle has prepared provisions and supplies for you. There are travel clothes on the bed. Your dress won't survive the journey. Elara glanced at the garments laid out while she had been staring out the window. Sturdy trousers, a tunic, a leather vest, and boots that actually looked like they might fit. Thank you. He nodded curtly, then seemed to hesitate. Last night, you asked why I was helping you. I gave you reasons, and they were true. But there's something else you should know. He moved to the window, looking out over his domain. The law I've served for 2 centuries. It was meant to maintain balance between our world and the human kingdoms. Execute the truly dangerous. Protect the innocent from those who would harm them. I believed in that purpose. And now I wonder how many I've executed who were like you. Different, powerful, but not evil. How many were condemned because they threatened someone's power, rather than because they deserved death? His jaw tightened. I cannot undo what I've done, but I can ensure I don't add your name to that list of regrets. The honesty in his words caught Elara off guard. She had expected a monster, a mindless executioner. Instead, she found someone capable of doubt, of growth, of questioning the very foundations of his existence. What's your name? She asked suddenly. Your real name, not your title. He turned to face her, surprise flickering across his features. No one has asked me that in over a century. Well, I'm asking now. If we're traveling together, if you're risking your life to help me, I should at least know what to call you. A long moment passed. Then, quietly, Kieran. My name is Kieran. Thank you, Kieran. She tested the name, found it suited him better than the cold formality of his title. For everything. He inclined his head slightly. Get dressed. We have a long road ahead, and our enemies won't wait for us to be ready. After he left, Elara changed quickly into the travel clothes. They fit surprisingly well, and she realized Grandmother Kale must have altered them during the night. The old woman's kindness brought an unexpected lump to her throat. In the span of a single day, she had gone from condemned prisoner to protected guest, from nobody to the last of an ancient bloodline. She touched the wooden pendant at her throat, the mark of the Cantors. Her ancestors, people she had never known existed until yesterday. Another knock, and this time Grandmother Kale entered, carrying a leather pack. Good, you're dressed. Here, food, water, herbs for healing, and a few other necessities. She set the pack down and pulled Elara into a surprisingly strong embrace. Be careful, child. The deep wild is not kind to those who don't know its ways. Will you be coming with us? The old woman shook her head. My traveling days are long past. Besides, someone needs to maintain the wards on the fortress and watch for further attacks. But Kieran will protect you. Of that, I have no doubt. Despite his fearsome reputation, my grandson has more honor in his smallest claw than most men have in their entire bodies. Grandmother Kale, can I ask you something? Of course, child. Last night, when I sang and the shadow creatures dissolved, I saw things. Flashes of images, like memories that weren't mine. A woman with a crown made of flowers, singing to an army that laid down their weapons. A man whose voice made crops grow in barren soil. And fire. So much fire and screaming and… She stopped, her throat tight. Grandmother Kale's expression grew somber. The Cantor gift sometimes carries echoes of those who came before. You're connected to your bloodline in ways that go beyond simple heredity. The memories you saw were likely from the Purge, the systematic elimination of your people. The Grove will help you understand these visions, help you separate what's yours from what belongs to your ancestors. What if I can't control it? What if this power is too much? Then you'll learn. That's what the Grove is for. It's not just a place, Elara. It's a living repository of Cantor knowledge, a teacher that has waited generations for one of the bloodline to return. She cupped Elara's face gently. You are stronger than you know, child. You survived an orphanage, loneliness, false accusations, and a death sentence. You sang away creatures of pure darkness with no training whatsoever. You will survive this too. The courtyard was a scene of organized chaos when they descended. Wolves in both forms moved with purpose, loading supplies, checking weapons, and organizing into what was clearly a well-practiced formation. Elara counted at least 20 wolves preparing to travel, including Moira, who sat near the gate watching for her. Kieran stood in the center, issuing orders with quiet authority. When he saw Elara, he gestured her over. We'll travel in a protective formation, he explained, pointing to a rough map spread across a wooden crate. You'll stay in the center with Moira and 3 other guardians. I'll range ahead with scouts to detect threats before they reach us. We have approximately 70 miles to cover through some of the most dangerous territory in the Wild Realms. What kind of dangers? Elara asked, studying the map. It showed the fortress, then vast stretches marked only with symbols she didn't recognize, before finally reaching a circled area labeled simply the Grove. Creatures that predate human civilization, wild magic that hasn't been tamed or channeled, territories claimed by things that make my wolves look domesticated. His finger traced their intended path. We'll follow the ancient roads where we can. They have some residual protective magic, but there are sections where we'll be exposed, vulnerable. That's when we'll be most at risk. A russet-colored wolf, the same one who had protected them the night before, trotted over and shifted smoothly into human form. The transformation was still startling to watch, reality seeming to bend and reform until a tall, lean man stood where the wolf had been. He had the same reddish hair as his wolf form and amber eyes that sparkled with intelligence. All preparations complete, Alpha, he reported. We can move on your command. Good. Marcus, this is Elara. Elara, Marcus is my second in command and will be coordinating the guard rotation around you. Marcus offered a slight bow. An honor, Lady Cantor. We'll keep you safe or die trying. Please don't die, Elara said quickly. You're worth more than you know, Marcus interrupted gently. The return of the Cantors could change everything. The balance of power, the relationship between humans and the wild realms, the very fabric of how magic flows through this world. If protecting you means some of us fall, that's a price we're willing to pay. Before Elara could protest further, Kieran raised his hand. Enough talk. We move now. Every moment we delay gives our enemies time to prepare. The gate swung open, and the pack moved out with fluid coordination. True to Kieran's word, Elara found herself surrounded by wolves in their animal forms. Moira on her left, 3 other massive wolves forming a protective diamond around her. Kieran and several others ranged ahead, disappearing into the forest with barely a sound. The fortress disappeared behind them within minutes, swallowed by the dense foliage. The path they followed was barely visible, more suggestion than road, winding between ancient trees whose trunks were wider than houses. The forest here felt different from the areas near Thornhaven, older, wilder, thrumming with a power that made Elara's skin prickle. "Stay alert," Marcus said from his position slightly ahead. He was in human form, carrying a bow that looked like it could punch through armor. "We're entering the Whispering Woods. The trees here are aware. They don't always appreciate travelers." As if in response to his words, the wind picked up, rustling through the leaves in patterns that almost sounded like voices. Elara strained to make out words, but they remained just beyond comprehension, whispers in a language she almost but didn't quite understand. They traveled for hours, stopping only briefly to water and rest. Kieran returned periodically from his scouting runs, conferring quietly with Marcus before disappearing again. Each time, Elara noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned the trees. It was mid-afternoon when everything went wrong. The attack came without warning. One moment they were moving through a clearing, the next the air filled with arrows. Not normal arrows. These trailed dark smoke and burned with sickly green fire where they struck. "Ambush!" Marcus roared, shifting instantly into his wolf form. "Defensive circle. Protect the Cantor." The wolves responded with practiced precision, the ones surrounding Elara pressing closer, while the outer ranks turned to face the threat. Figures emerged from the trees, humans in dark armor marked with symbols that made Elara's stomach turn. She recognized the crest on their chests. Lord Castellan's house. "Stand down!" one of them shouted, his voice amplified by magic. "Surrender the girl, and the rest of you can leave with your lives. This doesn't concern you, beast." A growl ripped through the clearing, and Kieran appeared at the edge of the defensive circle. He had shifted into his war form, the terrifying blend of human and wolf that she had seen during the shadow creature attack. His voice, when he spoke, carried the rumble of distant thunder. "You dare enter my territory? Dare threaten those under my protection?" He took a step forward, and the humans actually stepped back despite their numbers. "Leave now, or I'll paint these woods with your blood." "We have our orders," the leader said, though his voice shook slightly. "Lord Castellan wants the girl dead. We were told you would have already executed her. Why do you protect her now?" "Because she's innocent. Because the decree that condemned her was built on lies. Because I choose to." Kieran's golden eyes blazed. "Now leave. This is your only warning." The leader's hand moved to a pouch at his belt. "We were prepared for your resistance. Lord Castellan sends his regards." He threw something into the air, a crystal that shattered, releasing a pulse of red energy that swept across the clearing. The wolves howled in pain, their forms flickering as if the energy was disrupting their ability to maintain shape. Even Kieran staggered, his war form wavering. "Iron dust and binding magic," Marcus gasped, struggling to stay on his feet. "It weakens shifters, disrupts our—" More humans emerged from the trees, at least 40 of them, all armed with those poisoned arrows and wicked-looking blades. They had come prepared for a battle with shifters, had planned this ambush carefully, and Elara realized with sinking horror that the wolves couldn't protect her from this. Not while weakened by whatever magic that crystal had released. The human soldiers advanced, weapons raised. The wolves tried to form a defensive line, but their movements were sluggish, uncoordinated. Kieran fought to maintain his war form, his body flickering between human and wolf as the binding magic worked against him. Take the girl alive if possible, the leader commanded. But if she resists, kill her. Lord Castellan will accept either outcome. They were 20 feet away. 15. 10. Moira planted herself directly in front of Elara, hackles raised, teeth bared despite the magic weakening her. The massive she-wolf would die before letting them pass. Of that, Elara had no doubt. No, Elara whispered. I won't let you die for me. The warm surge inside her chest was becoming familiar now. The power that had awakened when she sang to the shadow creatures. The ancient gift of her bloodline. She could feel it there, waiting to be called upon, vast and terrible and hers. The soldiers were 5 feet away when Elara opened her mouth and sang. This time, she didn't reach for a lullaby or an instinctive defense. This time, she reached for something deeper, something that came from the echoes of memories she had glimpsed. The Cantor Queen who had made armies lay down their weapons. The voice that could command not just animals, but human hearts themselves. The melody that emerged was haunting, beautiful, and utterly irresistible. It wove through the clearing like silk, wrapping around each soldier, each human heart, finding the places where doubt and fear and humanity still lived. The soldiers froze mid-step, their weapons lowering despite their clear efforts to resist. Their leader's eyes went wide with terror as his sword fell from nerveless fingers. What is she doing? He gasped. I can't. My body won't. Elara's song shifted, becoming not a command but a question, a mirror held up to each person in that clearing. She didn't force them to see. She simply showed them what they were doing, who they were serving, what they had become. Images filled the air between them, conjured by her voice and the magic it carried. Visions of Lord Castellan's true nature, his corruption, his crimes. The soldiers saw their lord for what he truly was, a man who would eliminate anyone who threatened his power, who had fabricated evidence and condemned an innocent girl to death for the crime of existing. One by one, the soldiers fell to their knees. Some wept. Others simply stared at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. The leader looked up at Elara with tears streaming down his face. We didn't know, he choked out. He told us you were a threat to the kingdom, that you practiced dark magic, that you had to be stopped. We thought we were serving justice. Elara let her song fade, exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her. The power had taken something from her. She could feel it in the trembling of her limbs, the way her vision swam, but she forced herself to stay standing. Go home, she said quietly. Tell Lord Castellan that I know what he is and what he's done. Tell him that the Cantors have returned, and we will not be silenced again. The binding magic that had weakened the wolves was fading, Kieran's war form solidifying as he regained his strength. He moved to stand beside Elara, his voice a low growl. If you ever threaten her again, if you ever enter my territory with hostile intent, I will not be as merciful as she has been. Now go. The soldiers fled, leaving their weapons scattered across the clearing. Some ran. Others simply wandered away in a daze, their entire understanding of their world shattered by what they had seen. When they were gone, Elara's legs finally gave out. Kieran caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her easily in his arms. That was incredibly foolish, he said, but his tone was more concerned than angry. You could have torn your own mind apart reaching for that much power without training. They were going to kill you, Elara managed, her voice barely a whisper. All of you. I wouldn't. Rest now, Kieran said softly, carrying her to a fallen log where he could set her down more comfortably. Marcus, check the perimeter. Make sure there are no more surprises waiting. Moira, stay with her. The she-wolf immediately curled herself around Elara, providing warmth and comfort. Kieran knelt in front of them, his golden eyes searching Elara's face. What you did, making them see the truth about their lord, breaking whatever loyalty magic or simple conviction bound them, that's master-level Cantor work. How did you know how to do that? I didn't, Elara admitted. I just felt it. Like the knowledge was already inside me, waiting to be used. Is that normal? For a Cantor? I honestly don't know. The last one died 200 years ago. He pulled a water skin from his pack and offered it to her. But it speaks to the depth of your potential. And it terrifies me if I'm being honest. Terrifies you? Power like yours, in the wrong hands or used without proper control, could reshape kingdoms, rewrite the very fabric of reality. The human rulers who ordered the purge weren't entirely wrong to fear the Cantors. They just went about it in the most monstrous way possible. His expression softened. But watching you spare those soldiers, give them truth instead of destruction when you could have simply eliminated them, that gives me hope that you'll use your gifts wisely. Marcus returned, shifting back to human form. Perimeter is clear for now, but we need to move. That encounter will draw attention. Things in these woods that are attracted to displays of magic, to the scent of power. Agreed, Kieran said, standing. Can you walk, Elara? She tested her legs, found them shaky but functional. I can manage. We'll slow our pace, but we need to put distance between us and this clearing. He looked around at his pack, taking stock. Several wolves were still recovering from the binding magic, but none appeared seriously injured. We've been fortunate so far, but our luck won't hold forever. They moved deeper into the forest, leaving the clearing and its scattered weapons behind. As they walked, Elara noticed the landscape changing. The trees grew even larger, their bark taking on strange colors, deep purples, blues that seemed to glow faintly in the shadows. The air itself felt thicker, charged with magic that made her teeth ache. We're entering the deep wild now, Marcus said quietly, moving closer to Elara's protective circle. From here forward, stay absolutely within the formation. Don't wander, don't investigate strange sounds, and for the love of all that's sacred, don't sing unless it's life or death. Why not? Because in the deep wild, everything is listening, and some things respond to music in ways that are unpredictable. Night fell quickly beneath the dense canopy, and they were forced to make camp in a small clearing ringed by stones that Kieran said had protective properties. They built no fire. Kieran insisted that light would draw too much attention, and ate cold rations while wolves took turns keeping watch. Elara sat with her back against one of the ancient stones, Moira's warm bulk pressed against her side. Across the clearing, Kieran spoke quietly with Marcus and the other senior wolves, planning their route for the next day. He's different than I expected, Elara murmured to Moira, who couldn't respond in words but whose ears perked attentively. The stories made him sound like a monster, but he's just a person trying to do what he thinks is right. Moira made a soft chuffing sound that might have been agreement. Do you think we'll make it to the grove? Elara continued, finding comfort in voicing her thoughts even if the she-wolf couldn't answer. Or is Lord Castellan going to keep sending people to kill me until one of them succeeds? A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond their camp. Every wolf in the clearing went still, heads turning toward the sound. Kieran rose smoothly, his body already beginning to shift, claws extending from his fingertips. Something's out there, he said quietly. Something big. The darkness between the trees seemed to deepen, to congeal into something almost solid. And then Elara heard it. A sound like wind through a cave, like the last breath of something dying, like nothing she had ever heard before. What is that? She whispered. Kieran's expression was grim. Shadow Hunter. Bigger than the creatures that attacked the fortress. Much bigger. The thing that emerged from the darkness was a nightmare-made manifest. It stood at least 12 feet tall, its form constantly shifting between solid and shadow, with too many limbs that ended in claws like curved blades. Its eyes, it had at least 6 of them, glowed with that same sickly green fire as the poisoned arrows, and it was staring directly at Elara. "Defensive positions!" Kieran commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Protect the canter!" The wolves formed a living wall between Elara and the creature, but she could see the fear in their movements. This thing was different from the shadow creatures at the fortress. Older, more powerful, radiating malevolence that made her bones ache. The shadow hunter moved with terrible speed, its multiple limbs carrying it forward in a skittering rush. The first rank of wolves met it with fang and claw, but their attacks passed through shadow more often than they struck solid flesh. When they did connect, the creature barely seemed to notice, shrugging off wounds that should have been fatal. Kieran, in his full war form now, leaped at the thing's throat. His claws found purchase, tearing through shadow to the core of darkness beneath. The creature screamed, a sound that made Elara's ears ring, and backhanded Kieran with one massive limb. He flew through the air and crashed into a tree with a sickening crack, sliding to the ground and not moving. "Kieran!" Elara screamed, trying to run to him, but Moira blocked her path, herding her back toward the protective stones. The shadow hunter pressed its advantage, tearing through the wolves' defensive line. Marcus fell with a cry of pain, 3 long gashes across his chest. Another wolf was caught by those terrible claws and flung aside like a rag doll. They were losing. Despite their strength, their skill, their courage, they were no match for this creature. Elara felt the power rising in her chest again, that vast ocean of potential that her voice could tap into. But she was so tired already, still drained from the confrontation with the soldiers. If she reached for her gift now, pushed herself this far, she didn't know if she could maintain control. The shadow hunter's eyes fixed on her again, and it began to push through the wolves with single-minded purpose. It wanted her specifically, had been sent to eliminate her just like the creatures at the fortress. She had a choice. Let her protectors die trying to save her, or risk everything to save them. It wasn't really a choice at all. Elara stepped out from behind Moira's protective bulk and opened her mouth to sing. But this time, she didn't reach for the canter magic, didn't try to command or control or show truth. This time, she reached deeper, into the memories that weren't hers, into the echoes of her bloodline that Grandmother Kale had spoken of. She reached for the moment she had glimpsed in her visions, the Cantor Queen standing before her enemies as they burned her people, as they tried to destroy everything the Cantors had built. She reached for the song of rage. The sound that emerged was nothing like her previous melodies. It was harsh, discordant, primal, a song of fury and defiance and absolute refusal to submit. It cut through the clearing like a blade, and the shadow hunter froze mid-stride. Elara felt something tear inside her as she sang, felt her voice reaching limits that shouldn't be pushed. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The song poured out of her, and with it came images. Not visions this time, but memories that belonged to her ancestors. The Purge. Hundreds of Cantors hunted down and eliminated. Children torn from their parents' arms. Entire bloodlines erased from history. All because fearful men couldn't stand the thought of power they couldn't control. The shadow hunter began to dissolve, but unlike before, it wasn't peaceful. It writhed and screamed as Elara's song tore it apart, unmade it piece by piece, sent it back to whatever dark realm had spawned it. When the last trace of the creature was gone, Elara's song transformed into something else, a healing melody, instinctive and desperate. She sang to the wounded wolves, to Marcus bleeding on the ground, to Kieran still motionless against that tree. Golden light began to emanate from her, spreading across the clearing like dawn breaking. Where it touched the wounded wolves, their injuries began to close. Marcus gasped as the gashes on his chest sealed themselves. Other wolves rose to their feet, healed by the power flowing through her voice. The light reached Kieran, and Elara saw him stir, saw his eyes flutter open as whatever internal injuries he had sustained began to mend. Only then did she let the song end, and with it, her consciousness faded. She was aware of falling, of Moira's panicked whine, of Kieran's voice calling her name from what seemed like a great distance. Then darkness claimed her, and she knew nothing more. When Elara woke, it was to the sensation of gentle rocking and the warmth of fur against her skin. She opened her eyes to find herself cradled in Kieran's arms as he walked. He had returned to his human form, though she could see the strain in his face, the careful way he moved that suggested he was still healing from the shadow hunter's attack. "Welcome back," he said softly when he noticed her eyes open. "You've been unconscious for 6 hours. We couldn't stop moving. Your light show would have drawn every curious creature for miles." "Did everyone?" She couldn't finish the question. "Survive?" "Yes, thanks to you." Whatever that healing song was, it saved Marcus and at least 3 others who wouldn't have made it otherwise. His golden eyes met hers. "But you nearly killed yourself in the process. Your nose was bleeding, you were burning with fever, and your heart was beating so irregularly I thought we'd lost you 3 times. But I'm okay now?" "Define okay. You're alive. Whether you've done permanent damage to yourself by pushing your gift so hard, we won't know until Grandmother Kale can examine you." His arms tightened slightly around her. Don't do that again. Not without training. You're no use to anyone dead. You were no use to anyone dead either, Elara shot back, surprising herself with the sharpness in her tone. What was I supposed to do? Let that thing kill you all? Yes, he said bluntly. If the alternative is burning yourself out and leaving the world without its last canter, then yes. My life, all our lives, are worth less than what you represent. That's ridiculous. You're not just pieces on a game board to be sacrificed for some greater purpose. You're people. You matter. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. You really believe that? Of course I do. Don't you? He was quiet for a long moment, his stride never faltering as he carried her through the forest. Around them, the pack moved in formation, more cautious now after the Shadowhunter attack. I've lived for over 2 centuries, Kieran finally said. I've seen kingdoms rise and fall, watched generations of humans live and die in what feels like the blink of an eye. After that long, it becomes hard to value individual lives the way you do. They all seem so temporary, fleeting, like trying to hold on to water. But they're not water, Elara said quietly. Every life matters. Every person is irreplaceable. Is that what your Cantor bloodline teaches? Or is that just you? I don't know. I don't know anything about my bloodline except what Grandmother Kale told me. But I know that treating lives as expendable is what led to the Purge. That's what allowed the kingdoms to justify genocide. They convinced themselves that Cantor lives were worth less than their own fear and desire for control. Kieran looked down at her, his expression unreadable. You're going to change everything, aren't you? Not just because of your power, but because of who you are. I'm nobody special, Elara protested. You're the girl who sang forgiveness to soldiers sent to kill her, who nearly destroyed herself to save a pack of wolves she met less than 2 days ago, who somehow maintains compassion and hope despite everything that's been done to you. He shook his head slowly. If that's what nobody special looks like, Elara, then the world desperately needs more of it. Before she could respond, Marcus appeared beside them in human form. Alpha, we're approaching the Black Rapids. We'll need to find a crossing point. Put me down, Elara said. I can walk. You shouldn't have to carry me. Kieran hesitated, then carefully set her on her feet. Her legs were shaky, but held. Moira immediately pressed against her side, offering support. Thank you, Elara said to the she-wolf, running her fingers through the thick fur. For everything. They emerged from the tree line to find themselves at the edge of a massive river. The water was dark, almost black, rushing past with violent speed over rocks that looked sharp enough to cut steel. The sound was deafening. The rapids lived up to their name. How do we cross that? Elara asked, raising her voice to be heard over the water. There's a bridge about a mile upstream, Kieran said, consulting with Marcus. Ancient construction, but it should still hold. It's the only reliable crossing point for 50 miles in either direction, and you can bet our enemies know that, Marcus added grimly. If they want to set another ambush, that bridge would be the perfect place. We don't have a choice, Kieran said. We can't afford to add days to our journey by finding another crossing. We go to the bridge, but we go carefully. Scout it thoroughly before we commit. They followed the river upstream, the sound of the rapids a constant roar in Elara's ears. Despite Moira's support and her own determination, Elara found herself struggling. The exhaustion from using her gift so extensively was deeper than simple physical tiredness. It felt like her soul itself needed rest. The bridge, when they finally reached it, was both beautiful and terrifying. It was made of white stone that seemed to glow faintly even in daylight, its construction speaking of a time and culture long forgotten. But it was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, and it spanned a section of the river where the rapids were at their most violent. One misstep would mean certain death. Kieran sent scouts ahead, wolves in their animal forms who could move quickly and silently. They returned within minutes, shifting back to human form to report. The bridge is clear, one of them said. No visible threats, no scent markers indicating recent passage. If it's a trap, it's well hidden. That's what worries me, Kieran muttered. He turned to Elara. You stay in the center of the pack. We'll cross in groups. Scouts first, then you with your protective detail, then the rear guard. Move quickly but carefully. Don't look down at the water. Why not look down? Because the Black Rapids have a reputation for showing people things they'd rather not see. Visions, memories, fears made manifest. It's not fatal, but it can make you lose your balance. They began the crossing. The scouts went first, moving across the narrow bridge with practiced ease. Then it was Elara's turn, surrounded by Moira and 3 other wolves, with Kieran directly ahead of her and Marcus behind. The moment Elara stepped onto the bridge, she understood what Kieran had meant. The water below seemed to call to her, and despite his warning, she found her eyes drawn downward. In the rushing dark water, she saw images forming. Her mother, the woman from her one memory, singing as soldiers broke down a door. The woman gathering magic around herself, using her voice to create a barrier while she pressed a wooden pendant into baby Elara's hands and whispered words of love and protection. Then soldiers rushing in, the barrier falling, the woman's song turning to screams as Elara stumbled, nearly fell. Moira's massive body blocked her, keeping her from toppling over the edge. Kieran's hand grabbed her arm, steadying her. "Don't look," he commanded. "Keep your eyes on me. Only me." Elara forced her gaze up, focusing on Kieran's golden eyes, the firm set of his shoulders, the way his hand gripped her arm with careful strength. She took another step, then another, each one an act of will. They were halfway across when the real attack came. Not from the bridge, not from the forest, but from the water itself. The rapids seemed to surge upward, forming shapes, humanoid figures made entirely of black water, their forms constantly dissolving and reforming. They pulled themselves onto the bridge, at least a dozen of them, cutting off both retreat and advance. "Water wraiths," Kieran snarled. "Of course. Lord Castellan is pulling out all the stops." The wraiths moved with fluid grace, their hands forming blades of frozen water. They attacked without sound, without mercy, forcing the wolves to engage on a bridge barely wide enough to maneuver. Kieran shifted partially, his war form better suited to combat in the confined space. He met the first wraith's attack with vicious efficiency, his claws passing through water to find the core of ice at the creature's center. It shattered with a sound like breaking glass. But more kept coming, rising from the rapids in endless waves. The wolves fought desperately, but on the narrow bridge, their numbers were a disadvantage. They couldn't all engage at once, couldn't bring their full strength to bear. A wraith broke through the defensive line and lunged for Elara. Moira intercepted it, her massive jaws closing on its watery arm. The wraith's other hand formed a blade and stabbed down toward the she-wolf's exposed flank. "No!" Elara's voice emerged as a single pure note, instinctive and desperate. The wraith froze mid-strike. Around them, the other water wraiths paused in their attacks, their forms rippling as if responding to an invisible current. Elara realized what she was doing. She was singing to the water itself, to the ancient magic that gave these creatures form. Her voice reached out to the Black Rapids, to the wild, untamed power flowing beneath the bridge. And the rapids answered. The water wraiths dissolved, their forms losing cohesion, returning to the river from which they had been summoned. But Elara's song didn't stop there. It reached deeper, asking the rapids themselves for aid, for safe passage, for protection. The violent churning of the water below began to calm, the rapids smoothing into a gentler flow. The deafening roar quieted to a rushing whisper. The visions cleared, leaving only dark water reflecting the sky above. "Move!" Kieran commanded, recognizing the gift they had been given. "While it lasts!" They ran. All of them, wolves and Elara together, racing across the bridge while the Black Rapids held their peace. They reached the far side, just as Elara's song faltered, the exhaustion finally too much to overcome. The rapids resumed their violent churning the moment her voice stopped, as if they had never been calm at all. Elara collapsed onto solid ground, gasping for breath. She had pushed herself again, used her gift when she was already depleted, and she could feel the cost in every cell of her body. Kieran knelt beside her, his war form receding back to human. That was incredible, and incredibly dangerous. "You're going to kill yourself if you keep this up." "How much farther?" Elara managed to ask. "To the grove? If we push hard and have no more encounters, we could reach it by tomorrow night." His expression was concerned. But I don't know if you can survive another confrontation like this. I'll survive, Elara said with more confidence than she felt. I have to, because if I don't reach the grove and learn to control this power properly, I'm going to burn out anyway. Marcus approached, his expression grave. We need to keep moving. That display of power will have been felt for miles. Every creature with magical sensitivity will know something significant just happened here. They pressed on into the deepening twilight, leaving the black rapids behind. The landscape grew stranger with each mile. Trees with bark that shimmered like oil on water, flowers that glowed with their own light, mushrooms the size of barrels growing in impossible spirals. We're close now, Kieran said as they walked. The grove affects the surrounding forest, makes it more alive, more magical. We should reach the boundary by morning. And then what? Elara asked. What happens when we actually reach the grove? Kieran exchanged a glance with Marcus. Honestly, we don't know. No one from my pack has entered the sacred grove in over a century. The stories say it tests those who enter, judges their worth, and that it responds differently to different people. What do you think it will do to me? You're a cantor. The grove was made for your kind, built to teach and empower them. I think— He paused, choosing his words carefully. I think it will show you everything you need to become what you were meant to be. Whether you survive that knowledge is another question entirely. They made camp as darkness fell, settling into a formation that had become familiar. Protective circle, rotating watches, cold rations, and tense vigilance. But Elara noticed something different about the wolves tonight. They watched her not with the wariness of protectors, but with something closer to reverence. She had saved them, multiple times. A human girl with no training had protected a pack of ancient wolf shifters through nothing but instinct and will. That night, as Elara lay wrapped in furs with Moira's warmth beside her, she stared up at the stars visible through breaks in the canopy. Somewhere out there Lord Castellan was plotting. Somewhere human kingdoms feared her return. Somewhere the legacy of her murdered ancestors waited for her to claim it. Tomorrow she would reach the sacred grove. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, surrounded by wolves who had chosen to protect her, led by a king who had chosen honor over duty, Elara allowed herself a moment of peace. She was no longer just running from death. She was running toward her destiny, and she would face it singing. The sacred grove appeared at dawn, a cathedral of ancient trees whose branches wove together to form a living dome. Light filtered through leaves in shafts of gold and green, and the air thrummed with power so intense it made Alara's teeth ache. This is where I leave you, Kieran said quietly. The grove permits only those of cantor blood to enter. Alara's heart raced. What if I can't control what happens inside? His golden eyes held hers. Then trust yourself the way my wolves trust you, the way I've come to trust you. She stepped forward, and the grove welcomed her. Trees parted, revealing a circular clearing where a crystal pool reflected the sky. As Elara approached, the water began to sing, voices of every cantor who had ever lived. Their songs, their memories, their power flowing into her. She understood now. Everything. The gift, the responsibility, the truth of what had been stolen from the world when her people were destroyed. Elara opened her mouth and sang, not just with her voice, but with her soul, her blood, her very essence. The song rose from the grove, spreading across the forest, across the kingdoms beyond, and the world listened.